Welcome to today's webinar on managing through a crisis. Our speaker today is one of the most well-known and respected names in the industry, Ms. Vinita Bali, a global business leader with extensive experience across sectors, leading companies in India as well as abroad. She has worked for eminent companies such as Britannia, Cadbury's, Coke. So she has worked in the US, UK, Nigeria, South Africa, Latin America, and of course, India. Effective April 2014, Vinita moved from a full-time operational role as CEO and MD of Britannia to pursue her wide-ranging interests in corporate as well as development sector. Currently, she is on the board of Smith & Nephew, Cognizant Technologies, Bunge Limited, CRISIL, as well as Syngene International. So welcome, Vinita. It's wonderful to have you. We have a lot of participants, a lot of questions for you on the topic, which I must admit, managing through a crisis is a very wide topic with several dimensions to it. And we'll come to the Q&A subsequently. But to start off, Vinita, if you could just share some of your thoughts on the key priorities, the key aspects that business leaders and organizations have to keep in mind as they navigate through today's uncertain times. Over to you, Vinita.
Thank you very much, Ira, and a very good afternoon to all of you who have taken the trouble and the time to join this webinar. I'm hoping to make it lively and interactive because, this is one of those situations where, frankly, nobody has the answer. We might all have parts of the answer, but I don't think everybody has the answer. So I'm going to talk initially for about 15 to 20 minutes, share a broad overview of how I see the situation, which comes from a variety of sources. It comes from listening to conversations that happen in boards, not just in India, but also overseas. It comes from, my own thinking and my own experience. Of course, I've not had experience with managing a pandemic, but, I have had experience with managing other kinds of crises, whether it was my work in Africa or Latin America. So I want to really maybe divide this into three parts. The first point I want to make is that our current situation is unlike any other that the world has seen, and therefore any of us has seen. And I will elaborate on that in a minute. The second point I want to make is that the impact of what we in India and the world is going through will be sectoral. In other words, some industries and some sectors will be more affected, will be differently affected than others. And I'll elaborate on that as well. And the third is, and the most important, because, with the first two, we can't really do very much. It is an exogenous variable. We are not impacting it. Those variables are impacting us. But the last one is different, and it's very important because that is within our control. And that really is to do with managements and boards and individuals requiring new skills and competencies to deal with the situation that we are in. So let me spend the next few minutes elaborating on these 3 points. Let me get back to where I started, which is that this situation is unlike any other. And why do I say this? I say this because in its simplest form, we are seeing for the first time a situation which has challenged both demand as well as supply chains. So when the 2008 financial crisis happened, it impacted demand because of what happened with banks and individuals and so on and so forth. It didn't really impact supply chains as much. When we have, a flood or a cyclone or a natural calamity, it impacts supply chains longer than it impacts demand, because, there is demand for products, but because of the disruption and obstacles, you cannot get products in. This is a situation that has impacted both supply chain as well as demand. And we have to think about this very closely and very critically. When we find ourselves in a situation that says that, let's take pharmaceuticals, 70% of APIs or active pharma ingredients are coming from China for the whole world, it actually spells a great risk. It may not be COVID, it could be anything else. I'm sure all of you in your business look at or sit down with your auditors or with your business teams, and you've looked at risks, etc. You know, we look at risks of concentration, we look at risks of concentration of suppliers, concentration of customers, etc. But perhaps the need to be lowest cost, the need to be cost efficient, etc., has driven some decisions to the point where the risk inherent in those decisions has not been sufficiently discussed or debated. So we have in India both supply and demand issues at the moment. And secondly, this is not just an India problem, it is a global problem. I think as far as India is concerned, all of you would have seen the data that has just been released. You know, we are talking about COVID as though it is the only culprit. But actually, those of you who have been in business should have seen, I'm assuming you have seen, this trend of declining sales. You know, COVID, our lockdown was announced on the 25th of March. So at best, it impacted 1 week of the last quarter. But look at the results that we have seen. Our growth rate in quarter 4 of the last fiscal was 3.1%, the lowest it has been in decades. Our growth rate for the entire year was 4%, and this has come down from about 8 to 8.5% 4 to 5 years ago. So we were in a problem, I would not say crisis. We were in a problem even before COVID. And I think it's very important to understand that, because one of the responsibilities of leadership, and I heard this from somebody I used to work for, is that leaders must acknowledge facts. Leaders must acknowledge reality and give hope. And therefore it is incumbent on all of you, on all of us in our leadership positions to acknowledge the facts. What was the situation on the ground before COVID, and how it has been exacerbated as a result of COVID? I think both of those are very, very important and critical. Another reason why this situation is a tough one is because it is getting us to confront what, you know, typically a lot of people say, we don't know what we don't know. So let me just take a minute and elaborate this. Very often we are confronted with problems which are known and solutions which are also known. You know, I need to set up a factory. You know, you're not the first person setting up the factory. You know, what has to be done, etc., is known. You just have to go and do it. So those are simple problems that have fairly straightforward and simple solutions. Then we can have unknown problems but known solutions, in the sense that I have not confronted the problem, but somebody else has, and therefore the solution for that problem exists. So those, from simple, we can say a little bit more complicated. Then there is a third category where the problem is unknown, and therefore the problem is unknown and the solution is unknown. A lot of things that innovators confront, a lot of things that entrepreneurs confront, a lot of things that when you are innovating a new business model, you know, you are breaking the existing paradigms and you're saying, how do I tackle this differently? Those are not simple, not complicated, but perhaps complex. And yet those solutions exist. I think the combination of a declining rate of growth in our own economy and COVID-19 that comes with not just not having a vaccine, but not even having a treatment, not even having a deep understanding of how people get infected and so on. So we are learning as we go. You would have seen every country is experimenting, companies are experimenting, there are lockdowns announced, then they are lifted, then they're announced again. That is because people want to do the best, but we don't really know what the solutions are. So there is a little bit of experimentation that is going on. And that is where we find ourselves. And therefore, I am saying that this situation is complex and it is tough. Which takes me to my second point, which is that because the situation is complex and tough, it requires new skills and competencies and new ways of working as far as organizations are concerned. You have to be very agile and very nimble in terms of what needs to be done in the short term or what needs to be done in the immediate term. From a simple thing like, so when people get back to work and they haven't been back to work for a long time, what are the protocols and SOPs that you're going to lay down? To saying, where is my business headed in the long term? And even though it is COVID, and even though it is causing so much of disruption, one thing is certain, even this will end. We don't know when, we don't know how, but what we do know is that this will end. And therefore, if your business orientation is that you are in business for the long term, you are in business for the long term to create value, not just for yourself, but for all your other stakeholders, whether these are people who've invested in your company, whether these are your employees, your vendors, other members of your supply chain, the government, tax authorities, the environment. It's very important and critical that we don't take our eye off what is the reason for my business to be in existence, because COVID has not wiped out that reason. It has simply made it difficult for you to operate. So I think we have to be very focused on our purpose, but we also have to be very nimble and agile when it comes to what needs to be done tomorrow, what needs to be done in the short term, what needs to be done in the long term. It therefore calls for matching agility with risk-taking. A lot of times we talk about, risk assessments. Those of you who come from listed companies, you know that, risk committees were made mandatory. And, I keep saying that despite risk committees having been made mandatory, etc., at least I am not aware of any organization anywhere in the world that had pandemic as the number one or number two or even the number three risk that was listed on their risk register. We've all been talking about this VUCA world, a world which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, the VUCA world is here. It's called COVID-19, and we are not really prepared for it. So I think there has to be some introspection and reflection between committees and the executives on how we are going to deal with the unknowable. Most of you would have seen cybersecurity as a risk. That is because computers have been attacked. Ransomware is, quite rampant, I would say, and companies are dealing with it all the time. So everybody lists cybersecurity as a risk, but nobody lists COVID as a risk, despite the fact that the world has seen Ebola, the world has seen SARS, the world has seen MERS, but we never thought that suddenly 185 countries would be impacted in a matter of months. So that is a lesson for executives, that is a lesson for board members, that is a lesson for academicians who study business. The next point I want to make in how will we deal with this, and this I cannot emphasize enough, is how the culture, the values of your organizations are going to make decisions on people. These people could be your employees. These people could be your vendors. These people could be your contract workers. These could be anybody. This is a time for businesses to really be responsible, to not let the short term interfere with the long term. Now, I know and I'm very aware that what I'm saying is not easy. Businesses have to generate money, businesses have to have cash flow, but certainly if businesses like yours give up on their employees, give up on their vendors, or give up hope, then it's going to be a very painful and a very expensive recovery for India. So I think we have to be, and I know there are some questions, and I'll take those questions on when we come to the interactive session. But I do believe this is the time when executives and the board have to get very focused on conserving cash, on conserving money, on being frugal. You would have read, not just in India, but several large organizations around the world. The top executives have announced either that they will not take a salary or they will take a salary cut. And all this because you don't want to do this to the junior people in your organization or even to the mid-level in your organization, because let us not forget it. Those are the people who come in every day and do the hard work that keeps our factories running, that keeps our sales organizations bringing in revenue, that keeps our back-end operation running, that keeps our transportation going, etc., etc. So I think this is a time to really be circumspect about what are the values and beliefs that drive your organization. What are the values and beliefs on the basis of which you operate? Because when your employees see you living those values, when your employees say that they're not asking me for a sacrifice without sacrificing their own, money or comfort or stock options or whatever it is, then they will have a renewed respect, a renewed engagement with the company. And trust me, without your engaged and loyal employees, you will not have a business. So my sincere appeal to all of you is really to say, what is it that you need to do in the short term to tide over this difficult situation? Companies that are well run, you will have positive cash flows, you will have credit lines. The one thing that the government has done is said to the banks that, give credit. If your business is a robust business and is credit worthy, you can get loans from banks and your business will deliver the returns. If not in the next 6 months, if not in the next 12 months, then certainly in the next 18 months for you to return that capital. But think of it differently. In the process, you would have taken care of your employees. You would have taken care of employment. You would have taken care of so many families that are dependent on your employees. And this is a time when I believe that business interest and social interest has to go hand in hand. We cannot have a business in the middle of social strife, in the middle of people going hungry, in the middle of millions of people feeling that there is nobody to care for them. They are, we are all citizens of the same country. We will all benefit or perish together. And therefore, keeping that long-term view is very important and critical. I think this is also a time for executives and the board to go back to the basics. Why are we doing what we are doing? Are we doing it in the best possible manner? I think questioning how you do what you do is a very important thing. I think coming up with innovative solutions to whatever the problem of your industry or your company is very critical and important. But do not take the easy way out and say, I have to reduce my costs, therefore let me let go of people, or those decisions which you may have to repent at a later stage. I am sure, given what I said earlier, that the business fundamentals, and I'm talking about India here, given that our rate of growth had slowed down, I'm sure the well-run companies were already asking these questions. The well-run companies were already on the path to saying, how do we actually improve our business? How do we improve the way we are wired? How do we improve the way we work? How do we improve our returns to our shareholders? So you may be ahead of the curve. Crises like these also separate, as they say, the men from the boys. They separate those companies with excellence from the very ordinary companies. And they separate the winners from the losers. So it is competitive, but it also is a test of the quality and the excellence that each of us brings to our organizations. So my third and last point before I turn it over for your questions really has to do with the fact that this impact will be sectoral. Not every industry, not every company will be impacted in the same way. We've already seen that. If you look at essentials, if you look at companies that sell low unit priced products that all of us buy and consume, whether this is soap, whether it is detergent, whether it is a packet of biscuits, whether it is food, whether it is pharmaceuticals, all of those things, in fact, actually stand to benefit. I have seen some work which actually shows that in the fast moving consumer goods, brands that were number 5, 6, or 7 also got bought off the shelves as, all of us were actually, buying products for our needs during the lockdown. So of course, sectors like hospitality, of course, sectors like, airlines will be more impacted than sectors like pharma or consumer goods, etc. But slowly that will also come back, because I think everybody is realizing, and you would see it around the world, that the answer to flattening the COVID curve is not to flatten your economy. In fact, there are some, Moody's has downgraded India. We're just now downgraded India. We're just now level above junk status. We've seen reports of, from very well-known economists that look at a negative GDP growth of 25% for India. And it is up to us to actually stimulate the economy, both as consumers as well as producers. Let us not forget that when a migrant, or what we are calling migrants, they're actually not migrants, they're residents of the country which we are residents of. When they don't have any money, and by the way, there are about, 800 million people in India who are self-employed. And they include everybody from agricultural labor to weavers to artisans to the kirana shop, etc. And they're not asking any of us to give them employment. But if they don't earn, because they earn on a daily basis, we lose the consumption of 800 million people. So let us also not forget that is why I said it's complex, because it's both a demand issue as well as a supply issue. And if people don't have money to spend, it is going to impact every industry. And therefore, it is very, very important and very critical for all of us to do that balance between what is right for our business and what is right for our people and our stakeholders, because at the end of the day, the collective of our employees and our other stakeholders is also the collective of our consumers. So with those few remarks, I am going to, I guess, turn it back to Ela to redirect the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinita. I think you really structured it very well, because it's such a wide topic that one can spend hours. I think the three areas that you structured in it makes a lot of sense for companies in India. So, so just carrying on the conversation, given these guidelines, how do companies prioritize between the immediate short term, the medium term, and the long term? What should be the key priorities, say for the next 6 months, 12 to 14 months, and then the next 18 to 24 months?
It's a very general question, and I'm going to give a very general answer, which is it depends on your company. It depends on your sector. It depends on whether you're the leading company in your sector or, the number 2 or 3 player in your sector. But no matter who you are, one of the things that you have to do in in any term, short term, long term, whatever, is to keep the viability of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you keep the viability of the company? You keep the viability of the company by managing your resources effectively. As I said, I am hoping that companies that are well run. In fact, I think we all had a warning before COVID came to actually tighten our strings and look at effective and efficient management of our companies, primarily because we saw 8 or 12 quarters of a declining growth. Now, even if COVID had not happened, the fact that every quarter the rate of growth was coming down should have been a huge alarm bell for industry to say, what is it that we need to do to spruce up both our demand as well as make our supply chains more effective? So this is the time to go into your business model. This is the time to go into everything that the company is doing. Now, without overwhelming the management, this is also the time to be very frugal and to be very clear in your priorities. I think managing cash, whatever cash you have, needs to be conserved. If you've got, as I said, lines of credit, by all means, use those lines of credit. The one good thing, and there are many other things that could have been done different and better in the package that has been announced, but the one good thing is that access to credit is available, whether you are an MSME or anybody else, because there is liquidity with the banks. And I think if you've got a good business case to show for yourself, you can get money from the banks. And I think part of business, which all of you have demonstrated, is part of running your own business, for those of you who run your own businesses, and for those of you who are professionals running other businesses. Part of business is the ability to identify and manage risk. And I think this is the time to be creative. This is the time to be innovative. This is the time to conserve cash. This is the time to be circumspect. This is the time to be nimble. This is the time to take action fast, but not without thinking. This is not the time for knee-jerk reaction. This is the time for those of you who are on boards to be, to deal with equanimity. We can't get, excited, and we can't get, what should I say? We can't have knee-jerk reactions. I think we have to be circumspect, because any decision you make will have an immediate impact as well as a longer-term impact.
Right. So Vinita, you just talked about managing risks, and in your opening remarks, you also talked about how the supply chains have, while trying to go for cost efficiency, so much of sourcing it's not just China, but sourcing is spread out globally. So do you see any changes in how companies would be planning supply chain? Also, you talked about reskilling. So do you see that the skills required in supply chain would change drastically, and how can companies prepare their employees for these?
So obviously you can't, you can't suddenly start teaching new skills because that takes time. But certainly if you look at skills, they may not be available inside your company. This is also the time to not be afraid of outsourcing some of these skills. again, I want to point out, and I think COVID has taught us many lessons. Some of those are directly related to COVID, and some of those may not be related to COVID. I don't know. You have to ask this question yourself. For a long time, we have been saying, come to India, make in India, etc. Now, I don't know how many of you or how many businesses have taken the opportunity to actually set up parallel or alternate supply chains which feed industries in India. I don't want to sound, I don't know how to quite say this without it, appearing to be, a little bit rude. But, frankly, if we have taken the easy way out so far, and we have been sourcing from China, because guess what? China made it cheaper than we could make it in India, and we didn't even try to make it in India. Well, now is the time to not talk about it, but to do it. We've seen a lot of people say the big opportunity that India has, or the big potential for India, is to take away some of the business from Chinese manufacturing and therefore Chinese supply chains. I think we should stop talking about it. I think each of us should go back to our business and say, what part of this am I outsourcing? What part of this am I outsourcing outside the country? And what part of it can I in-source very, very quickly? Because actually, if you look at it differently, we do have some, we've got unique talents and skills. We've got engineering skills. We've got, data skills. We've got software skills. We've also got so many people, who are either relatively less employed or might be unemployed. We've already started hearing from companies that companies have started, asking some of their employees to leave. So we have the resources. Look at how quickly most companies actually created work for home possible. Networks, the fiber optic networks existed, but people were, hundreds of thousands of people started working from home. So we've got that talent. I think we also need to think differently. We've got so much of other talent. All these people who we are calling migrants, they are fantastic plumbers. They are fantastic electricians. They are the ones who create the wonderful homes in which many of us live. So there is that talent. We just have to go and source that talent. And I think we have to really, really think out of the box. This is not about putting an ad in the paper or going on LinkedIn and finding the right employee that you want. I think our net has to be cast very wide. We should be prepared to take some risks. But I do believe that that talent exists in India. And even if it is not fully trained, is smart enough to actually be trained and to actually start delivering a return on the investment that you make in that talent.
Right. So, Vinita, it's very interesting you talk about talent, and I'm also going to link this back to something that you shared towards the beginning, that as leaders, we need to make our people aware of the situation, but also give them hope. So there are a couple of questions on, on the culture and human aspect, which I'm just going to pose to you, and you can respond one by one. So one of the questions is, how do you, make that tightrope walk between hope and transparency? So, while you are transparent, so similar to what you said, but you also give people hope. There is also talk of empathy and resilience. So some people have asked, how can they build resilience in their own organization and employees? And some of the comments that are coming right now, as we speak, is that, but to survive, we will need to let go of our employees. We don't want to do that, but we may have to let go of some employees, and that will impact employee morale. So, your take on this.
So let me deal with the last one first. And I want to challenge all of us to think a little differently. Why do we feel that sacrificing some people is essential to saving our business? What are the other options that we have considered? Have we considered options like paying salaries in arrears, being transparent to all the people and saying, you know, transparency means I share with you my problem. And honestly, some of us might be surprised that the solutions will come from the people who we think are the problem. And therefore, we are saying we're going to let go of them. If you went to your employees and said, look, this is the reality of our company. We want you, we want the business. And I am assuming that you had all of these people because you had a certain momentum of business. If you believe that getting back to that momentum of business is important and critical to you, then frankly, you cannot let go of those people. Because in the end, it will cost you more to let go and then go back and hire, unless you're willing to run a business which is much less than the business that you were running, in which case the question I would have for you is, you know, why would you want to do that in the first place? So I think it's very important to consider all the options, every single option. As I said, there are organizations where, you know, the owner, promoter, senior executives, etc. Think of those people who've got enough resources to live off those resources without impacting their lifestyle for a year. And I would say, you know, the top 20% of your company should be able to do that. And by the way, if you go back and see how much the top 20% of your company is costing you, it'll be nothing less than, you know, 50, 60%. So those large numbers of people that you will let go of, actually in the end, don't cost you that much. And actually in the end, are those people on whose work you are relying to do what you're doing. So there are many ways of dealing with it. Think of top management salaries. I know boards that have said that we are not going to take commissions and board fees because, you know, we can live without any of that. I think if that is the nature of the organization, if that is a value that you want to portray, and I can tell you, you will get a lot of employee engagement and you will get a lot of employee commitment when employees see you as the senior managers making the sacrifice before we call upon them to make a sacrifice. You can look at cutting down salaries up to a certain level by 20%. And at the very junior levels, give them the salaries. You can actually postpone some of the variable pay that you might be giving to your employees. Why am I saying all this? I am saying all this because if you can find a way of navigating the next 6 to 12 months with your employees intact and a resurgence in your business, and this is a very general comment. I mean, obviously, if you're in the airline business, it would be very different. But I'm assuming that, you know, we are either professionals or we are part of MSMEs or we are part of, you know, a supply chain, etc. You know, those businesses, I think, can be held on to for the next 6 to 12 months, you know, without sacrificing employees. So, you know, that is what I would say. Sorry, Ela, what was the first question?
Yeah, the other part was, right, some of these actions may need to be taken, be it may be layoffs, maybe salary reductions. How do you keep the employees motivated? And the other bit that somebody asked about was the tightrope walk between
transparency and
hope. Yeah, transparency and hope.
You know, when you decide to be transparent, there is no tightrope walk because you've decided to be transparent. Now, it is not, see, what is transparency? Transparency says, I trust you enough to share my hopes, my desires, my problems, my solutions, and my concerns. And in return, I hope you will reciprocate with your ideas, with your thoughts, with your solutions, because the problem that exists is neither your problem nor my problem, but our problem. I think that is transparency. Transparency is about trusting. Transparency is about believing that there are people in the organization that will help us find solutions. And really, in my experience, and I've dealt with some very rough and tough solutions. I dealt with huge devaluations when I worked in Nigeria. I worked in Latin America, where in fact the joke used to be that in Brazil, when you walk into a supermarket, the price of a can of Coke is X. And by the time you buy everything, the price of that can of Coke has changed because they were pegged to the dollar. And as the real devaluated, obviously the prices went up in real. So we've dealt with those situations. Several of you would have dealt with those situations as well. So transparency is about taking your people into confidence. It is about trust. It is about saying we have to work collaboratively and together to find solutions to the problem, because this is not just my business if I'm the promoter or the proprietor or the CEO, but this is our business, because you don't have a business without two constituencies. You don't have a business without consumers, and you don't have a business without employees.
Right. So on consumers, again, with one of the questions, though I suspect it would depend on the industry, but I'll just read out the question. At this stage, should large profitable companies not be reducing the prices to take care of their customers, as many do not have money to spend?
Should not take care of...
No. Should companies be reducing prices as consumers do not have money to spend?
Well, that is, again, I go back, and that is a function of your priorities and actually what you want to do. And as they say, that in every crisis is an opportunity. Now, the well-run companies, the strong companies, use a crisis like this to consolidate their business. You will be surprised that in a crisis like this, the well-run companies and the strong companies are actually going ahead and acquiring other companies or doing mergers, etc. We've seen a couple of examples in India as well. So I think it depends on what is the goal or the objective that you have for your company. If you believe that you've got the strength of your balance sheet in addition to your P&L to actually reduce prices, increase your market share, consolidate your business in the short term because it gives you benefits and a competitive advantage in the long term, by all means, you should go ahead and do that. By all means, if there are other companies where you've been looking to acquire, or there are inorganic growth opportunities, and again, you have the liquidity and the balance sheet strength to do that, you should go ahead and pursue that. Because as I said, we all have to believe that, this, no matter how bizarre and strange the experiences, is not going to last.
Right. So, Vinita, that's a very interesting point. When you talk about pursuing inorganic growth opportunities, would you say that if companies are looking at investments, a lot of places we have been reading that one should not make investments at this point of time. So, do you believe that there could still be areas where companies can go for investments?
Oh, absolutely. If you're not going to make an investment at this point in time, when the valuations are so low, why would you wait to make investments? See, if you are clear that this is my business, if you are clear that I want this business to be around for the next few hundred years, if you are clear that you have a business model that is going to be able to deliver when things get back to some form of normalcy as we know it, then this is a great time to make investments, because as I said, valuations are low. Think of it differently. The well-run companies haven't come down in terms of, or I'm talking about the listed companies. The well-run companies are still maintaining their PEs have gone up and all of that has happened, but they are still maintaining their very strong positions in the market. And if you're a well-run company and there are companies in your domain who you have been eyeing for some time, and you believe they could present good opportunities for growth in the future, you should certainly look at that. I'm associated with, as a board member, on one or two companies where we've made some acquisitions in the last few months.
Right. Okay. So another interesting point that you talked about was being innovative, while looking for talent. The same put out a GD route may not work, and there is a lot of talent, and through technology, it's actually going to make working more seamless. So one of the questions is, will we see a lot more increase in flexible work, contract work, the so-called gig economy?
Again, it depends. There were many businesses that ran only on contractual work or gig economies. A lot of e-commerce, people who are delivering, etc., etc. That's all, on contractual work. If you look at manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing is also contractual. A lot of construction work is contractual. I think businesses have to go and think very hard about the other crisis, which in some ways, we are responsible for manufacturing. And that is this movement of 140 million people working in our cities back to the villages. For me, it is very clear that companies will have to think extremely differently and say, if I need people to work in my factories, I have to go and find those people within, 100 or 200 kilometers of my factory. Because those people who live 1,200 kilometers away, it will take a long time for them to trust us again and to come back and work in our factories. I think those are going to be some of the challenges on the supply chain. I think proximity to where your operations are, or proximity to where your business is, we'll have to go and find people within those catchment areas. And actually, in many ways, business or the supply chain of business or the delivery of business will become more localized than it has been in the past.
So my last question to you is that, what do you think when we come out on the other side of the pandemic, whenever the new normal or normalcy returns, what do you think would be the key lessons that we would learn as businesses, as an industry? From your perspective, what would be the implications on the social sector or the civil society? Just some closing thoughts on the lessons that should hopefully emerge on the other side of this pandemic.
Thanks, Ira, for asking this question. I think it's a very important question. And in fact, I think it is the most important question. Because if we don't take away at least one very significant and important lesson from this, and that is that none of us, no matter what business we do or what industry we run, we are part of an ecosystem, which is not just our immediate community or our country or Asia, but it is the world. If we don't understand the interconnectedness of this ecosystem to the world in which we live, I think we would have missed a very important lesson. And frankly, if we don't learn that lesson, nature has a way of teaching us lessons. So, COVID-20 or Corona's cousin will come, and, we will be in for another very tough time. Because we've had warnings, we've had warnings of SARS and MERS and swine flu and Ebola and, forest fires and tsunamis. And as we are speaking, we're talking about a cyclone that is going to hit Bombay. And, this is going to be the first cyclone to come to Bombay after 100 years. What is this telling us? This is telling us that we have taken our environment for granted. It is telling us that the devastation that we have created through our actions is not good for the world in which we live. It is telling us that if the Amazon, which is in Brazil, and we think it is very, very far away, except that the Amazon provides 25% of the world's oxygen. So 25% of what you and I are breathing is coming from the Amazon. If we don't take that into account, I would definitely say that if nothing else, let's go and watch some of the wonderful documentaries that David Attenborough has been making tirelessly, where he says that in the last 50 years, 50, we have caused more devastation to this world than what's caused in the time before that. His latest documentary talks about the fact that by 2040, if we continue doing what we are doing now, there will be no ice in the Arctic. Now, if we think we are not connected with the Arctic, we are wrong. So I don't want to be very dramatic about this, but I do want to be very dramatic about this. I do want to say that our actions have a cyclical impact. If I am not treating my effluent, and if I'm putting it into the rivers or into the lakes of Bangalore, well, the rivers and lakes are going to rebel. And the one thing is for certain, that those rivers and lakes will be around much longer than any of us are around. So I think if there is one lesson that we as leaders of industry have to take away, it is to say, how do I do business in a manner which is responsible? How do I do business in a manner that is friendly to the environment? Those of you who've got businesses globally, etc., would see that increasingly what is being called ESG, which is environment, social, and governance, are reports that shareholders and proxy advisors and large pension funds who invest in companies are insisting on. What is your record for the environment, for the social sector, as well as for governance? Because I think people are realizing, and certainly those of you who have businesses that employ millennials, they are asking the questions, what is the future that you have created for us, and what is the world that you have created for us? And I think as responsible business people, it is our, it is our duty, and it is our core responsibility to actually create an environment which is self-sustaining, to create an environment which is regenerative, to create an environment which has plenty, and to create an environment in which the well-being of all, people, plants, trees, animals, birds, fish, etc., is taken together as a whole.
I think a lot of us need to think about this, and you have certainly given us a lot of points and a lot of insights for the participants to take away and actually work on. So I'll not take any more of your time, Vinita. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you're working across time zones and things are pretty busy, but good to know that you've been able to catch some documentaries as well. So thank you very much, Vinita.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thanks for the opportunity, and all the best to everybody who's on this call.